The snow had been falling on the Bavarian Alps for 6 days without stopping. The keep at Erlangenstein sat on a granite shoulder above a frozen valley, and on the night of the 28th of January, in the year of our Lord 1742, every window in the castle was dark except for one. A single lamp burned in the kitchen at the back of the keep, behind a low stone arch, beside a long oak table worn smooth by 400 years of use. A girl was at the basin scrubbing a pot. She was 19 years old. She did not know what was about to walk through the door behind her. The man who walked through that door was 380 years old, and he had not eaten for 43 days, and he was the only thing on the mountain that night that had ever taken a human life with its own hands. What he did instead, when he saw her, is the reason a small bakery in modern Bavaria still leaves a loaf of rye bread on its back step every Sunday morning, 283 years later, for an uncle nobody alive has ever met. Stay with me on this one. His name was Friedrich von Erlangen. He had been born in the spring of 1362, the second son of a minor Bavarian count, in a smaller castle a day's ride from the one he now haunted. He had been turned in the autumn of his 18th year by a woman whose name he no longer said out loud, in a forest outside Regensburg, in a year when the plague had taken half the county. He had not asked for it. He had only known he was dying, and that a hand with very cold fingers had been on his cheek, and that a voice that was not human had said, "You do not have to go." He had not gone. In the centuries since, he had buried 4 wives. He had outlived 11 kings. He had watched the castle his father built fall to ruin, and another rise on a different ridge. He owned the keep at Erlangenstein under the name of a great-grandson who had never existed, a paper man he renewed every 50 years with the help of a notary in Munich. He fed twice a year, sometimes 3 times. He fed on travelers in the high passes who had wandered off the road in storms, men who would have died of exposure within the hour anyway. He did not feed on women. He did not feed on the young. He did not feed on anyone he had ever spoken to. The rules were the only thing left of the boy he had been before the woman in the forest. The winter of 1742 was the hardest he could remember in 200 years. The passes had been closed since the first week of December. No travelers, no couriers, no woodcutters going up to the timber line. The keep had a skeleton staff, 4 people total. A steward named Old Hands who had been in the household 40 years and knew not to ask questions. A stableman named Conrad who slept with the horses and rarely came inside. A cook named Frau Brunner who came up from the village 3 days a week when the road allowed and had not been able to come in nearly 2 weeks. And one new girl who had arrived in November on a wagon from the village. Friedrich had not seen her face yet. He kept his own hours. The staff thought he was a sickly nobleman with a delicate stomach and a love of solitude. They were paid well not to think more than that. For 43 days he had not fed. He had meant to ride out to the Eastern Pass at the end of December. There had been a rumor of a peddler caught between villages. By the time he saddled the horse, the storm had closed the road, and the peddler, if he had ever existed, was already a frozen shape under 3 feet of snow somewhere he would never find him. By the 3rd week of January, the hunger was no longer a hunger. It was a sound. It lived behind his eyes. A thin, high ringing that did not stop when he covered his ears. His hands had begun to shake when he held a book. His vision had begun to do a thing it had not done in 2 centuries, a slow narrowing at the edges, as if the world were a tunnel and the light at the end of it were running out. He knew what came next. He had seen it once, in another vampire who had refused to feed for reasons of conscience and had finally lost the conscience along with everything else. On the night of the 28th, he came down from the upper hall. He had not meant to. He had meant to stay in his rooms and hold out one more night, and ride for the village at dawn no matter what the road looked like. He had meant to keep the rules. He came down because he heard a sound. It was a small sound. A pot being set down. A spoon against the side of a basin. The small private sounds a person makes when they think they are alone. He stood at the top of the back stairs for a long time with his hand on the stone wall and listened, and the ringing behind his eyes got louder, and his mouth filled with something that was not saliva, and he told himself he would only go down to look. Only to look. He would stand in the doorway. He would go back up. He went down the stairs. The kitchen was warm. The hearth was banked low but still alive, a red glow under gray ash. A single oil lamp sat on the table. The girl was at the basin with her back to him. She wore a heavy gray wool dress and a white apron and a kerchief over her hair, and her sleeves were pushed up to her elbows, and her forearms were red from the hot water. She was scrubbing a copper pot with a handful of sand and a cloth. She was humming very quietly just under her breath, a tune he could not quite catch. He stood in the doorway. The hunger said now. He did not move. He could feel his own teeth in his mouth in a way he had not let himself feel in 43 days. He could feel the cords at the sides of his neck. He could feel the weight of his own arms. He could see, with the strange narrowed vision the hunger had given him, exactly where her pulse moved in her throat under the kerchief. He could see the small artery in her wrist, where it disappeared into the cuff of her sleeve. He could see, even from 12 feet away in the dim lamplight, the faint blue map of veins at the inside of her elbow. He took one step in. She turned. She did not scream. She did not drop the pot. She made a small sound that was almost a laugh. She put her hand to her chest. She said, "Oh, forgive me, sir. I did not hear you on the stairs." He could not speak. She put the pot down. She wiped her hands on her apron. She gave him a small, clumsy curtsy. She said, "I am Greta, sir. Greta Hoffman. From the village. Old Hands took me on in November. I am sorry if I was too loud. I thought everyone was asleep." He looked at her face. He had not looked at it yet. He had been looking at her throat, her wrist, the parts of her the hunger needed. When she turned around, he looked at her face and he saw his sister. His sister had been dead for 376 years. Her name had been Elizabeth. She had been 1 year older than him. They had grown up in the older castle, the one that was now a ruin on a different ridge 2 valleys to the west. She had had a wide mouth and a small chin and round eyes the color of wet slate, and a way of tilting her head slightly to the right when she listened, the way a bird does. She had sung. When their mother died of childbed fever in 1372, Elizabeth had kept singing the songs she had been taught, in the kitchen, in the garden, at the loom, all through the years that followed. When the plague came in 1380, it had taken them both at the same hour in the same chamber, in 2 beds set side by side. He had been 18. She had been 19. He had survived. She had not. She had died with her hand in his, singing under her breath at the end, the song their mother had taught her, the one about the shepherd and the lost lamb and the Alpine Pass. The girl in the kitchen had her face. Not exactly. Greta's nose was straighter. Greta's hair, where it showed under the kerchief, was darker. But the mouth was the same. The chin was the same. The eyes were the same gray. And when Greta tilted her head just a little to the right, she did it the way Elizabeth had done it, exactly the way, the small bird tilt of a girl listening with her whole body. Friedrich made a sound in his throat. It was not a word. It was not a moan. It was the sound a man makes when something he buried a very long time ago comes up out of the ground in front of him without warning. Greta took half a step toward him. Concern came into her face. She said, "Sir, are you unwell?" Should I fetch old hands? He shook his head. He could not get his mouth to work. He gripped the door frame and held very still and closed his eyes, and he made himself count. He counted in Latin first, because Latin was older in him than German now, and then he switched to German. He counted to 30. He opened his eyes. She was still there. She had not moved. She was watching him with the steady, unfrightened gaze of a country girl who had grown up around sick old people and dying animals. She said, "Sit down, sir." "Please." "There is soup on the back of the stove. I made it for myself, but there is plenty." "Sit." He sat. His legs simply stopped holding him up. He crossed the kitchen and pulled out the long bench at the oak table and sat down on it heavily, and he put his hands flat on the wood and stared at them. They were very pale. The veins on the backs of them were dark blue. They looked like the hands of a corpse. Greta went to the stove. She lifted the lid off a small iron pot. Steam came up. He heard her ladle the soup into a bowl. He heard her cut a slice of dark bread from a loaf on the sideboard. He heard her open a cupboard for a spoon. The small kitchen sounds were the most ordinary sounds in the world, and they were the loudest sounds he had heard in years, because he was listening to them through the silence of a man who had nearly killed a girl in a doorway and had stopped because of the angle of her head. She set the bowl down in front of him. She set the bread next to it. She set the spoon in his hand. She did not ask him why his hands were shaking. She just sat down on the bench across from him and folded her hands in her lap and waited. He could not eat soup. He had not eaten soup in 362 years. He picked up the spoon anyway because she had put it in his hand. He dipped it in the bowl. He brought it to his mouth. He swallowed. The soup tasted like nothing. He swallowed again. His stomach turned. He set the spoon down. He said in a cracked old voice, "Thank you." Greta said, "You are welcome, sir." He said, "What is your name again?" "Greta, sir." "Greta Hoffman." "Where are you from, Greta Hoffman?" "From the village, sir." "From down in St. Margarethen." "My father is the cooper." "My mother is dead." "I have 4 brothers." "4 brothers?" "Yes, sir." "Are they good to you?" She thought about it. She gave him an honest answer. 2 are. 1 is not. The 4th is too small to know yet. He almost smiled. He did not smile. The closest he came was a small thing at the corner of his mouth, a thing that had not happened to his face in months. He said, "How old are you, Greta?" 19, sir." 20 in the spring." He closed his eyes. She was 19. Elizabeth had been 19. The world he lived in was the world of a man who had outlived 11 kings, and yet here, in his own kitchen, on a night when he should have been somewhere else, the world had folded back on itself and put a 19-year-old girl with his sister's face across the table from him and asked him a question. The question was whether he was still the boy who had held his sister's hand in 1380. He sat at the table for a long time without speaking. Greta sat across from him. She did not speak. She did not fidget. She did not look away. She had been raised, he thought, by women who knew how to sit with a person who was hurting. He felt the tears on his face before he understood that they were tears. They came down very slowly. He did not sob. He just sat at the table in the kitchen of his own keep, 380 years old, and he wept, and the girl across from him watched him weep and did not ask him why. After a long time she said, very gently, "It is the storm, sir. The storm makes people sad. My grandmother used to say so. She said the long winters take the lid off things." He laughed. It was a small sound, almost like a cough. He said, "Your grandmother was a wise woman." "She was." "Is she still living?" No, sir. She died 3 winters ago. She was 81. 81. That is a long life. It was. She said she had had enough of it by the end. She said her bones were tired. He nodded. He picked up the spoon again. He took another mouthful of soup. He did not know why he kept eating something that meant nothing to him, but he kept eating it because she had made it, and because he could not bear to set the spoon down again with her watching him. Listen, if you are still with me on this one, hit that subscribe button and stay with me, because what happens at this kitchen table in the next hour is the part that breaks open 400 years of silence, and it starts with a song that nobody alive should still know. He set the spoon down. He pushed the bowl aside, only a little, the way a man does who has not finished but has eaten as much as he can. He folded his hands on the table. He said, Greta, I am going to tell you a thing about myself. I have not told it to anyone in a very long time. You do not have to do anything with it. You do not have to answer. I only need to say it to someone tonight. I would be grateful if that someone could be you. She nodded. He said, I had a sister once. Her name was Elizabeth. She was a year older than I was. She had a face very much like yours. When you turned around just now, I thought for a moment that I was looking at her. I have not seen her face in a very long time. Greta said softly, What happened to her, sir? She died. She died young. She died of an illness. How old was she? 19. She was 19. Greta's hand went, without her thinking about it, to her own throat. He saw the gesture. He had seen it before. Country girls did it when they heard about another girl who had died at their age. It was an old gesture. It went back further than either of them. He said, We grew up in a castle that no longer stands. 2 valleys to the west of here, on a high ridge. There is nothing left of it now. Goats live in the foundations. Our mother died when I was 10. Elizabeth raised me after that. Our father was often away. There were servants, of course, but it was Elizabeth who taught me my letters, and Elizabeth who fed me, and Elizabeth who sang to me in the evenings. She had a song our mother had taught her. About a shepherd. About the Alpine Pass. About a lamb that wanders off and is found again at the snow line. I have not heard that song in 300 and save, he caught himself, in a very long time. I do not remember all the words anymore. I remember the melody. Greta tilted her head. The bird tilt. To the right. She said, Sing it for me. He had not sung anything in 150 years. His voice had grown low and rough, and not quite human at the edges. But she had asked him. He cleared his throat. He looked at the lamp. He sang. His voice cracked on the second note. He sang very quietly, almost under his breath, the way a man sings when he is not sure he has the right to make the sound. He sang the first verse. He did not have all the words. He hummed the parts he could not remember. He sang the second verse, and his voice broke on the line about the shepherd calling the lamb's name into the snow, and he stopped. Greta sat very still. Then she opened her mouth, and she sang it back to him. She sang it from the beginning. She had all the words. Her voice was clear and small and not trained, the voice of a girl who had grown up singing while she worked. She sang the first verse, the verse he had sung. She sang the second verse, the one he had broken on. She sang the third verse, which he did not remember at all, where the shepherd carries the lamb home in his arms across the white pass. She sang a fourth verse he had not even known existed, where the shepherd sits up all night beside the sleeping lamb and is glad. She sang it all. The melody was the same. Note for note. The same song his mother had sung to his sister, the same song Elizabeth had been humming under her breath on the night she died with her hand in his, in 1380. 400 years. The valley had passed it down. Mothers to daughters to daughters to daughters, in kitchens and at looms and over cradles, for 400 years, and somehow the melody had survived the plagues and the wars and the famines, and somehow it had come down to this girl, in this kitchen, on this night, with this man across the table from her. When she finished, the kitchen was very quiet. The hearth shifted. A coal fell. Friedrich said, "Where did you learn that song, Greta?" "From my grandmother, sir. She sang it to me when I was small. She said her own grandmother had sung it to her. She said it had always been in our family." "What was your grandmother's name?" "Magdalena, sir. Magdalena Lehner, before she was married." "Lehner?" "Yes, sir." He sat back on the bench. He put his hand over his mouth. He stared at the lamp. The Lehners had been a cousin family. He had not thought of them in 200 years. They had come into the village in the late 1400s out of a hamlet to the south, and they had taken the name from a piece of land. But he remembered the older name. He had been at the wedding of an old Lehner woman in 1516, who had told him at the wedding feast that her mother's mother's mother had been a woman named Marguerite von Erlangen, the only daughter of a cousin of the old line, the line that had ended when the last lord died without an heir in the plague year, 1380. Marguerite had been Elizabeth's third cousin. The line had not ended in 1380. The line had only narrowed. It had narrowed to a girl child in a cousin's house, and that girl child had grown up and had children, and over the centuries, through the small valleys of the Bavarian Alps, the line had continued, in women whose family names changed every generation, in a stream so thin that no one but a man with 380 years of patience could have traced it. Greta was at the end of that stream. Greta, in his kitchen, with his sister's face and his sister's tilt of the head and his mother's song on her lips, was a daughter of his sister's blood, 10 generations down. She was family. He took his hand away from his mouth. He looked at her. She said, "Sir, are you all right? You have gone very pale." He said, "Greta, tell me again. The name your grandmother said. The old name. The one before Lehner. Did she ever tell you?" Greta thought. She furrowed her brow. She said, "She told me once. It was a long word. It was a name from up the mountain. She said the family had come down a long time ago and lost it. I think it was," she paused. "I think it was Erlangen, sir. She said it was Erlangen. But she said no, one had used it in centuries. She said it was just a story." He nodded. He did not trust his voice. He said after a while, "It is not just a story." "Sir, nothing. I am tired, Greta. Forgive me. It has been a long winter." She nodded. She did not press. She was, he thought, the kind of person who could be told a thing was not for her to know and could let it be not for her to know. The valley had always had people like that too. He sat with her in the kitchen for 2 more hours. He did not eat any more of the soup. The hunger was still there. The high ringing was still there at the edge of his hearing, but it had moved back into a corner of him where it could be managed. He would feed at dawn. He would ride out at first light, no matter the road, and he would find some traveler in a snowbank, and he would do the thing he had to do. But he would not do it here. He would not do it to her. He would never do it to her. They talked while the lamp burned low. He asked her about her brothers. He asked her about the village, the cooper's shop, the priest, the new mill that had been built the year before, and she told him about all of it, in the easy, plain way of a country girl who had no reason to be guarded with a man who had asked for soup and wept at her table. He had not had a conversation like this in 200 years. Toward dawn, when the lamp was almost out, he stood up. He thanked her. He told her she was a kind girl, and that her mother would be proud of her. He went up the back stairs to his rooms and sat by his window in the dark and watched the snow stop falling for the first time in 6 days, and he thought about his sister, and he thought about what he was going to do. What he did in the months and years that followed, he did very quietly. He sent word to a notary in Munich. He drew up papers under one of his paper names. He arranged, through the steward of a small estate 2 valleys away, for a dowry to be settled on a young woman of good character in St. Margarethen, the daughter of the Cooper Hoffman, in recognition of the long and faithful service of the Hoffman family to the supposed lord of that supposed estate. It was the kind of dowry that would let a girl marry a man of her own choosing, and not a man her family needed her to marry. It was settled as if from a stranger. Greta finished out her year at the keep. In the spring, old Hans told her about the dowry, with a face full of wonder, and Greta cried. Not at the money, at the feeling of being seen by someone she had never met. She went home to the village. In the spring of 1745, she married a baker's son named Lucas Bauer, a quiet, square-faced young man with flour in the creases of his hands, who had loved her since she was 12 and had not dared to ask. They were married in the small stone church in St. Margarethen on a Sunday in May. Friedrich was not there, but a tall, pale gentleman in a dark cloak stood at the back of the churchyard during the ceremony, and was gone before the bride and groom came out. Greta and Lucas had 7 children. 6 lived to adulthood. Lucas took over the bakery in 1751 when his father died, and Greta worked beside him for 38 years. She had a way with the customers, the village said, a way of making a tired person feel less tired without saying anything. She buried her husband in 1789. She died in her sleep in the spring of 1793, at the age of 71, in the small house behind the bakery, surrounded by 2 of her surviving children and 4 of her grandchildren. She had 9 grandchildren by the time she died. Friedrich walked her funeral procession at a distance. He did not approach. He stood in the trees at the edge of the cemetery, in a long dark cloak, and he watched the village carry her in a plain pine box from the church to the grave, and he watched her children and her grandchildren weep, and he watched the earth close over her. He stood there until the last of the mourners had gone home, and then he stood there for another 6 hours, until the moon was high over the ridge and the cemetery was empty. At midnight he walked to her grave. He knelt down in front of it. He had brought a wildflower, a small blue thing called gentian, the kind that grows only in the high alpine passes above the timber line, in places where the wind never stops. He had ridden to the pass at sunset and picked it himself, with his bare hand, in a place where mortal hands would have frozen. He laid the flower on the fresh earth. He said very quietly, in the old German that nobody in the valley spoke anymore, "You came back to me, sister. You came back as her. I did not deserve it. Thank you." He stayed at the grave until first light. When he stood up, his cloak was white with frost. He rode away into the high country, and he did not come down again for 40 years. When he came down, the bakery was still there. It had passed to Greta's son, and then to her son's son, and then to a great-grandson named Werner Bauer, who had inherited the shop in 1831. Friedrich came in one Sunday morning in 1835. He had a different face by then. The slow drift his face went through every couple of generations to keep him from being recognized. He bought a loaf of dark rye. He paid in silver. He nodded to Werner Bauer, who did not know him, and he walked out, and he ate the bread on a bench by the river slowly, the way a man eats a thing that means something. He did this once a week, under different names and different faces, for the next 190 years. The bakery passed from Werner to his daughter Clara in 1872. From Clara to her son Otto. From Otto to his son Maximilian in 1938, in time for Maximilian to keep the shop open through a war he did not survive. From Maximilian's widow Trude to her daughter Helga. From Helga to her son Stefan. From Stefan to his daughter, who took it over in 2017, and who runs it now, in this year of 2025. Her name is Anna Bauer. She is 31 years old. She has dark hair that she wears in a long braid down her back when she is working. She has gray eyes the color of wet slate. When she laughs, she tilts her head just a little to the right. She is Greta's 7 times great-granddaughter. She does not know it. She knows her family has been baking bread in this village since the 1750s. She knows there is an old story, told to all the children when they are small and then half forgotten when they grow up, about an uncle named Friedrich who was very good to the family a long time ago, and who is owed a loaf of bread on the back step every Sunday. No matter what, no matter the weather, no matter whether anyone comes for it or not. The bread is always gone by Monday morning. The family has always assumed it is taken by foxes or by hungry children from the next village. They do not investigate. They have not investigated in 10 generations. The bread is left. The bread goes. The next Sunday, there is more bread. Anna does it now. Every Saturday night, after the shop is closed, she sets aside 1 extra loaf of dark rye and wraps it in a clean linen cloth. Every Sunday morning before opening, she takes it out the back door and sets it on the small wooden shelf her great-grandfather built into the wall, the shelf with the small carved letters that say Für Onkel Friedrich. For Uncle Friedrich. She does not know who Uncle Friedrich was. She does not know if he was real. She thinks of him as a kind of household ghost, a family habit. She has a small daughter now, 3 years old, named Mia, and she has started letting Mia carry the loaf to the back step on Sunday mornings, gravely, with both hands, like a small priestess making an offering. Mia has begun, on her own, to wave at the empty shelf when she sets the bread down. She says, "Hallo, Uncle." Anna has begun to wave too. Friedrich still comes. He comes on Sunday mornings, at 4:15 in the dark, before the village is awake. He has a different face this generation, the face of a slim, quiet man in his early 50s, a face he has been wearing since 2001. He wears a dark coat. He walks up the alley behind the bakery. He stops at the small wooden shelf. He picks up the loaf in its linen cloth. He stands there for a moment with the loaf in both hands, the way a man holds a thing that has been given to him on purpose, and he looks at the back door behind which his sister's 7 times great-granddaughter is asleep with her own daughter curled against her side, and he closes his eyes. He says, every week in the old German that nobody in the valley speaks anymore, the words he said to a fresh grave in 1793. "You came back to me, sister. Thank you." Then he walks away with the loaf. He takes it to the pass above the ruined castle where he and Elizabeth grew up, where the gentian still grows, and he sits on a stone in the dark, and he breaks the loaf, and he eats 1 mouthful and he swallows. He puts the rest on the stone for the foxes and the ravens. He watches the light come up over the ridge. Then he walks back down. He has done this every Sunday for 283 years. He will do it for as long as the bakery stands. He will do it for as long as there is a Bauer woman with gray eyes and a tilt of the head. He will do it for as long as the song his mother taught his sister is being hummed in some kitchen in some valley, by some woman who does not know where the song came from, and only knows that her grandmother used to sing it. He will do it because, on a night in 1742, in a kitchen in a keep in a snowstorm, he was 43 days hungry and he was about to take a girl, and the girl turned around and tilted her head a 1/4 inch to the right, and he saw the only person he had ever truly loved, and he did not take her, and instead he sat down across from her and he ate her soup and he wept, and she let him weep, and she sang him the song his mother had sung, and the world changed. Believe me. The strongest thing the strongest predator alive can do is sit across the table from the smallest mortal at hand and choose, in the moment when the choice is hardest, to be the brother of the dead girl in the bed beside him at 18, and not the thing in the doorway with the narrowed eyes. Friedrich von Erlangen made that choice once, in a kitchen, in a storm, in 1742. He has been making it every Sunday morning since. And the small bakery in the small Alpine valley has, without knowing the story, kept its end of the bargain for 10 generations. They leave the bread. The bread is taken. None of them know that the man who takes it is the reason their bloodline still exists. None of them know that the soup their grandmother's grandmother's grandmother served to a stranger one winter night saved every life that came after. None of them have to know. The loaf is enough. The small daughter with both hands on the bread, calling hallow to an empty shelf, is enough. Some debts are paid in flour and salt and a quiet word in an old language, on a stone above a ruined castle, before the sun comes up. Friedrich knows this. The valley, in its long, quiet way, has always known.